Hi everyone. So in this video I'm just going to chat briefly about your second healthy change journal. So the marks for your first one, as you know, are out, and overall you guys did really well. The average was around an 80, which is, to be honest, higher than I expected. Usually the written components are in like the 70s, so good job. So if you have any questions about your marks, make sure to follow that announcement that I put on Blackboard. Talk to the GA that marked it first. And doing this over email, from my experience working with intro psych, sucks. Getting feedback on a paper through email. So if you and the GA are comfortable talking over Teams or Zoom or phone or whatever, go for it. But otherwise, when you send emails, just try and give enough detail as to what area of the paper that you're confused about, what your thoughts are, etc. And then if you're still not clear or still have concerns, then you can reach out to me. But anyway, so talking about your second healthy change journal, remember it's due August 7th at 5 p.m. You have to submit through Blackboard. Take the time to find the submission area ahead of time so you're not stressing and trying to find it. Things always seemingly go missing when you're pressed for time. But the submission area is in the same resources folder that all the instructions are and that the first submission area was in. And it is also worth 15% of your grade, like the first one was. This one has the exact same page limit, so 3 to 6 double-spaced pages of content, so that doesn't include your title page and it doesn't include your references or any appendices. There's no abstract or table of contents needed, and it has to be an APA format, so Times New Roman font, 1-inch margins, etc., following the 7th edition of APA. Obviously, because it's a reflection, you can use personal pronouns if you want for the reflective part, because it'd be hard to talk about your own health behaviors without using personal pronouns. So contrary to APA, for this paper, that's fine. So remember, everything has to be submitted on Blackboard, and to be read on Blackboard, it has to be PDF or docx format, so Word or PDF format, otherwise we can't open it. So no Google Docs, no Pages, I think that's a MacBook thing. So none of that has to be either PDF or docx. You can do it however you want on your own computer, but you'll have to make sure it's converted into one of those two formats when you upload it. And like the first one, no late assignments accepted, especially with this being due at the end, like tail end of classes. You don't want to keep things going with allowing late assignments to keep trickling in and then trying to decide what the penalty will be for 1 day versus 2 days versus 2 weeks, etc. So no late assignments are accepted. Late assignments are 0. And I'm just reading along with the instructions that are posted on Blackboard. So as you know, any plagiarism is a 0 on the whole assignment. So plagiarism is kind of an umbrella term, and obviously it can vary in severity. But you have a massive disclaimer box on the second page. Takes up about a third of the second page of your instructions. It was there on your first one too. So especially if you had gotten any comments on citations or towing that plagiarism line or anything on your first assignment, you need to focus on this for your second one. So for APA, you need in-text citations and a reference page. In-text citations are whether or not you've paraphrased. So if you direct quote and you actually use the words, it has to be in quotation marks with in-text citation. If you paraphrase and put in your own words, you don't need direct quotes, but you still need the in-text citation saying this is where I got this specific information from. And then anything you have an in-text citation for has to be in your reference page. So basically your in-text citations and your reference page should match. There shouldn't be any extra references that I don't see in-text citations for, because I can't tell that you actually used the stuff. And if you did, I'm worried about plagiarism because you didn't cite. And you shouldn't have any in-text citations that aren't on your reference page, because the reference page I can use to go and find the sources if I wanted to. So you have 4 main examples of plagiarism in this massive disclaimer of if you have no in-text citations and no reference page, if you have one but not the other. So if you have in-text citations but no reference page, how do I know that these are legitimate, that you didn't just make them up? Or even just I can't follow and like the reference pages so I could find the source if I wanted to, maybe just from my own reading, right? So you need to have both. If you have a reference page and no in-text citations, not only are you not giving credit where the credit's actually due, but I can't tell that you actually use that information. You could have just thrown in the reference page, right? So you need both, or by APA standards, it's plagiarism. And then lastly, like these are just like 4 main examples. Lastly, if you haven't paraphrased, so you've copied it word for word, then it needs to be in direct quotes, because direct quotes means this is their information and it's their words. No direct quotes means it's their information, but it's my own words. So if you copy it word for word and don't actually paraphrase and you don't put it in direct quotes, then that's still plagiarism because you're copying their words but saying it's your own. So if you paraphrase, you actually have to change the sentence and put in your own words. You can't just even change a word or two, like, maybe use a synonym for a word or two. You actually have to put it in your own words. So there's absolutely no excuse at this point, especially for any plagiarism, so be aware of this. If you have any questions, like APA can be a bit of a pain to learn if you're new to it, and especially if you're not going to use it again. So if you have questions, reach out to GAs or myself. You have a folder with APA resources online on Blackboard as well. So moving on to the actual first page of the journal instructions. Someone emailed me, and I'm going to put an announcement on Blackboard about this. I had said earlier that or like way back before for Journal 1, that you'd be needing to hand in Journal 1 again with Journal 2. You won't need to do that because, it's Blackboard. I can just look it up on Blackboard myself. You already submitted it. The original usage of this assignment was, I believe, in like hard copy format. So, it would make sense. You would have been given back your Journal 1 for you to see your feedback. And then you'd actually have to give it back to me for me to see it again. So you don't need to resubmit Journal 1 because I can just open it up on Blackboard. So this second journal, is basically about reflecting on how your change went, and then talking about what health behaviors are and applying them to your change. So you're not going to be graded on how well you did or didn't incorporate a change. That would just be unethical and terrible to do to someone. So if you say wanted to eliminate cigarettes and you maybe eliminated a bit or made absolutely no change, or maybe if you're even smoking more now than you were back in June, you're not going to be graded on that. It's just on your actual written content and ability to do the reflections and everything. So the entire journal, there's 2 parts. Parts 1 and 2 has to be a minimum of 3 pages and a maximum of 6. If you're under 3, that probably means you don't have enough detail, because even a concise writer should need at least 3 pages. And if you're over 6, it probably means that you're being a little repetitive or have some redundant information. And with the first journal, there's a 1-point deduction for every page over or under. And remember, it doesn't include the title page, references, etc. It's just for the content. So the part 1 is talking about health behavior theories and reflecting on your own change. So with part 1, at this point, you've done your journal and hopefully tried to make a change between the time that you finished your first journal and the time that you hand this one in. So you're going to start kind of just a reminder of the health behavior, reflection of the change, and post-change measurement. So to introduce the reader in this paper, you're going to just start by introducing them to what it was you had tried to change. So it's just for 1 point because it is just a reminder. You're going to, again, just state what behavior you had chosen to change, describe it in well-defined terms. Like, I chose to incorporate exercise for 30 minutes, 3 days a week, etc. Just opening it up with reminding the reader of what you had set out to do. It's going to be the same GA marking them, but, just put them back. And also just a reminder to yourself of what you had set out to do. And again, a brief discussion of why you had chosen this change. So provide detail about what made you select that specific behavior, You can look back, like you can go back into your own journals to remind yourself if you need to. So some possible things to discuss, like you can think of your own points too, but was it a compromising behavior that you wanted to reduce? Was it a health promoting behavior that you wanted to increase? Was it something that you were experiencing unpleasant symptoms because of? So you actually saw things that were impacting you that you wanted to stop? Or is it just something that you knew you should probably change? Was it a behavior someone suggested you change? Did you decide yourself? Was it a behavior you tried to change in the past? So again, a reminder of why you chose this behavior. And that's worth 2 points. And you'll have one appendix for this paper. So remember, appendices go at the back. You reference them in text. So like refer to my, like when I did my baseline recording, and then in brackets you put appendix A. So that tells the reader this is the, like there's an appendix for this, it's appendix A, and then the reader goes to the back of the paper to find the actual appendix. So your one appendix is basically a post-change recording. So if you remember, your baseline was a state of where you are right now before trying to make a change. So go back to CBT, self-monitoring. You see where you're at before you try and change anything. So that was kind of like your pre-change baseline. And now you've tried to make a change. So you're going to do a post-change state of your behavior. So this will be just like your appendix A for journal 1. And you're going to do a week's worth of recording of that behavior in a week. So there should be 7 days of recording. So again, this paper is going to take 7 days to do. If you start it less than 7 days before the due date, you're not going to be able to do everything. So I strongly recommend that you use the same format you use for your baseline recording, just to make comparisons between the two much easier. But remember, it doesn't have to be any specific format. It's whatever works for you. So if you did a line graph, or if you just did a chart, whatever, just do another 7 days recordings of where you're at now. And if you didn't do the behavior that day, just make note of that, but don't leave it blank, because then I can't tell if you just didn't record that day. So you only did 5 or 6 days worth of recordings, or if you just didn't do the behavior on that day. So if you didn't exercise on Monday, don't exclude Monday, just put did not exercise. And that's totally fine. Maybe your goal was only to exercise 3 days a week. So there's going to be days that you have 0, right? And you're not being graded on your success or where your health behaviors are at. It's just your ability to submit this. So you'll get 7 points, 1 point for every day. And each day is kind of half a point for doing it, but then half a point for having detail. So again, if exercise is your goal, saying exercised versus saying went for a walk for 1 hour, there's got to be enough detail to see what you actually did. So this just gives the opportunity for you and for the GA marking it to actually see how the change went. Maybe it'll be the same. It will be a lot of change, right? So you're going to make that 1 week post-state change recording and attach it as Appendix A at the back, like after the reference page, whatever format works for you. But just remember that you're going to have to identify that unit of measurement that you used. So if you chose exercising, what was the unit of measurement? Did you specifically say, I want to incorporate any kind of exercise? And the unit of measurement will be time and then state the type. Or did you specifically say, I want to incorporate aerobic exercise? So just be clear of what the health behavior was that you wanted to change and like how you're recording it. So the remainder and bulk of part 1 is basically reflecting on how this went. So your experience with the healthy change. So be as honest as you're comfortable being, because you're not being marked on how well you did it, and provide as much detail as you're comfortable giving. So just don't mention anything that you're not comfortable elaborating on, but just make sure you're comfortable with a GA reading it or myself reading it. So your information should incorporate information from the appendices that you used in your first journal, right? So you're not going to have to resubmit the appendices. We can find that stuff on our own because it's all in Blackboard. And you don't have to like explicitly say Appendix E from Journal 1 because that would be a giant pain in the ass. But remember that you've done these worksheets on areas that were going to be tempting for you. So you could start to realize times that it's going to be hard. Pros and cons. So the things that will actually be a bit of a cost of making a good change. Like maybe not being able to eat as many yummy foods anymore. Or if smoking helped decrease your stress level, not having that anymore. Talking about prefactual thoughts that may have gotten in the way, seeing how motivated you actually were to make this change. Superordinate goals, so like other goals that are kind of connected to this goal, seeing how much the goal is your own goal versus someone else's. So you've done a lot of reflections on different areas. So when you reflect on how this healthy change went, bring those back into it. So factors that helped and hindered. So looking back, were there any more that you didn't think of that helped and hindered you? Was it the same? Were the hindering factors a lot more or less hindering than you thought they would be, etc.? So think of all those things that you reflected on before and bring them back in. If it helps you, you can totally redo the appendices, almost kind of another pre and post measurement just to see where you're at now, but don't include those. You don't need them. It's just if it helps you in your thinking process. At a minimum, it might help you to pull those documents up again to remember what you put. You can make a reference to your baseline recording and your current recordings here. So in the first journal, a lot of people asked, do I have to explain my baseline at all? And the short answer was no, but the long answer was it might come up in your reflection because, self-monitoring, a lot of people don't even know where they're at the time that they did the self-monitoring. So you can say, like, when I look at my baseline before I tried to make a change and looking at where I'm at now, I can see that I still have a ways to go. Or I didn't think I'd actually made much of a change, but apparently I have. So you can bring it up in your reflection because you now actually have evidence of before and after. Your reflection should have a lot of detail because this is worth 10 points. So this is the bulk of part 1. The other stuff was just that recording of where you're at now and then just a quick introductory reminder of what I tried to change and why. So this is the bulk of part 1. So you should have a decent amount of detail. You need to touch on all the points given in the instructions, but you can add more if you want. So there's a list of 6 things that you should try and touch on. So an evaluation of your change. Did you meet your goal? Did you meet it completely, partially, not at all? Did it get worse? Whatever it is. An honest evaluation from yourself on how you think you did. Kinda meeting the goal will probably be a pretty common occurrence for people, but an evaluation of did you meet the goal or not, and what does that mean? How do you feel about your success with your behavior change? So was it easier than you anticipated? Was it more difficult? Are you proud of yourself? Do you feel that you succeeded? Did you completely forget about it after you handed the paper in? I mean, that's fine. I'm not going to mark you on that, like, for forgetting. That's pretty common in a lot of people, right? So just be honest. Reflecting on things that were difficult, things that helped. So reflect on your factors that hinder and help. Were there any factors that you didn't think of back in June or that you did think of that really didn't come into play? Did you notice any benefits from applying this change, any downfalls? So reflecting on that decisional balance, pros and cons of making a change. Were there any you didn't think of back in June that you notice now, or that you did think of that weren't useful, or that didn't actually come up, etc.? Is this a behavior change that you want to continue? So reflecting on those motivation questions, how motivated are you now regarding this change? So if you remember that a lot of health behavior changes don't have immediate reinforcement, like if you make a healthy dietary change, it's not like all of a sudden you feel amazing and you look amazing, etc. So sometimes there aren't obvious pros to making a change. So it makes sense that sometimes you don't actually feel like you're getting anything out of it. So are you getting something out of it? Is it something you want to continue? Are you motivated now? Did this behavior change have any impacts on other areas of your life? So like those superordinate goals, was there any kind of a domino effect? Like, because I stopped smoking, I started eating a bit more, and so sometimes it could have negative or positive area impacts. So I started eating more, and now I realize I have to get my weight management under control. Or superordinate goals, I added much more exercise, and now I'm sleeping better, and my skin's better. So did this change impact any other areas of your life? So this isn't an exhaustive list. Add more. Be honest. If you couldn't make the change, if you just did the damn paper and then you forgot about it, that's fine. Or if you honestly meant to and then life just got in the way, that's fine. But just be honest. Reflect with yourself, and so we can see an honest reflection, an introspection in depth of how it went for you. If you struggled and or didn't make any changes, reflect on why that is. Maybe your heart wasn't really in it. Maybe you were just low on a lot of resources that you needed. If this pandemic honestly comes up, that makes total sense to bring it in. Like, there's no gyms right now, and I live in an unsafe area, and I didn't have the finances to buy equipment, so I couldn't even go out for a walk or buy home gym equipment, etc. If you were successful, what helped? Why were you successful? What do you think really helped you? Especially if it was something you tried before and weren't successful, why did it work now? If you forgot, didn't have the time, you can reflect on what took your time, energy away from making this change. So for full 10 out of 10 marks, you should have detail and specific examples. So if you say it was difficult, like I found it difficult to meet my fruit and vegetable intake, you should explain what that means. So it was difficult to meet my fruit and vegetable intake on the weekend because I didn't have the same daily routine. So there's a good example. For example, I was eating out more on the weekend, and this made it difficult. So don't just state these things, but actually give some explanation so we can get a visual, like tell us a story, so we can get a visual picture of what this is like for you. So that's for 10 points, and you can see I give the chunks of the rubric so you can actually see what it looks like. These are very detailed rubrics. I'd imagine they're not exhaustive. There might be times that maybe something's an 8 out of 10, but it's not for specific reasons laid out in the rubric, because otherwise the rubric itself would be pages long. But they're pretty detailed rubrics, so you can get an idea of what each level would look like. So that's part one. Now part two is a bit more of a researchy academic paper. So this is about applying health behavior theories to your change. So in this part, you're going to discuss an established health behavior change and then how it applies to your personal change. So if you remember part 3 of your first journal, that was kind of a very brief version of this. So in part 3 of journal 1, you had just talked about whatever relevant health psychology information you've learned from the textbook and how it applies to you. So in this one, you will choose either the theory of planned behavior or the health belief model. So choose one of the two. And if that actually came up in your part 3, like you can look back at that information and expand on it, but it's going to require a lot more detail. So you'll choose one of those two theories, describe that theory in detail, so what it is, its advantages and limitations, and the application of the theory with examples. And then you're going to apply it to your own behavior change. So a general tip for any writing really, but especially this one, don't assume the reader knows the theory. Write as though anyone could read and understand it. Just because your instructor is a psych major or your GAs are psych majors, to be honest, that doesn't even mean they remember the theory, because maybe they haven't worked on it in a while. So write as though we know nothing. So anything you mention, make sure you actually explain it, define it, etc. So this whole thing's out of 10 points, or 20 points, sorry, but the first part is out of 10, and that's where you will discuss what the theory is. So not about you, like this is not where you apply it to your own behavior change, but an academic discussion of what the theory is. So whichever of the two you chose. Here, you have to use the textbook. And remember, cite it as though it was a physical book. It's just the easiest way to encompass whatever format everyone has. But you also need to use 2 scholarly journal articles as supplementary resources. So a scholarly journal article isn't from a website, blog, or a magazine, or just some online journal. A scholarly journal article came from a peer-reviewed journal. So you can use the Leddy Library website, or if the St. Clair College has a similar library, journal access, PsycNet, Google Scholar, Scholars Portal. These are good areas to look for them. Don't pay for them. Like, please don't. I don't think I've ever paid for an article, and I don't even want to know how many articles I've had to read, especially like once you factor in a thesis and a dissertation and 10 years of 8 years now of university, and I've never paid for one, because a lot of times it's not even the authors that get the money, it's just like the big publishing companies. So you should be able to find a lot of free articles out there, and you only need 2. So the point of this is not only to give you experience looking for scholarly journals, but to see outside the textbook, how are these theories used? So how you use these supplementary sources is, I'm leaving that kind of up to you. You can just look for journals that talk about what the theory is, maybe that validated the theory and made sure it held up. Or maybe they use the theory in specific experiments with specific topics. I mean, it'd be pretty cool if you found a study that used the theory in the context of maybe the behavior change that you would actually try to make. Like if someone actually was, a study of incorporating exercise using the health belief model, like that'd be pretty perfect for someone's paper. But you just need to find 2 scholarly journal articles talking about this theory, like whichever the 2 you chose, to back up the information from the textbook, right? And I did do a very fast search on my own to make sure that such articles did exist. So there's lots of articles out there using these theories. It doesn't matter what country they came from. It just has to be a scholarly journal source. And it doesn't even have to be an experiment. Like it can just be a scholarly article that did a review of the theory. So if it's a non-scholarly journal, it won't count. You can use extra sources. So if you had your 2 scholarly journal articles and then you had non-scholarly ones you wanted to add, go for it. But as you'll see in the rubric, you do get points. So where is it? At the bottom, use of mandatory sources. So out of 3 points, 1 for the textbook, 1 for Article 1, and 1 for Article 2. If you have extra stuff, that's fine. But to get the 3 points, you have to have the 3 mandatory sources. So if you had the textbook and you had like 6 non-scholarly articles, you're not going to get the 2 points for the scholarly articles. So basically you have to have the requirements, and then if you want to add extra stuff, go for it. I did put an example of a scholarly journal article on Blackboard, so you'll see what it looks like. And like I said, the one that I put on Blackboard is when people did an experiment, but people do scholarly journal articles just a review of existing information, or a meta-analysis, which you remember is a study of looking at a bunch of studies. So it doesn't matter what they did, if they actually did an experiment or not, it just has to be a scholarly article. So here's where there's going to be a much heavier reliance on in-text citations compared to the first journal. Because in the first journal, unless you chose to pull in additional information, the only time that you really couldn't get away without in-text citations was part 3, because you had to talk about the information from the textbook. So In this one, because part 2 is all about information from secondary sources, remember you have to cite properly according to APA 7th edition, and you have to cite consistently. So there are tips and tricks if you find you're citing every single sentence. If you have a bunch of sentences in a row from the same source, you can just cite the first one, or even like the first and the last one. Like I had a former colleague call it like a sandwich, and then the reader knows everything in between is from the same source. And then the second you have a new source that you introduce, it kind of breaks the cycle. So if you find you're citing like every single sentence, there are those tricks to get around it. But when in doubt, make sure you cite, because it's easier than getting nailed and losing marks because you're accidentally plagiarizing. So likewise, you're expected to paraphrase the information. So remember, if it's in direct quotes, it means you didn't change the wording. If it's not in direct quotes, that means you should have paraphrased it, which is really putting it in your own words, not just changing a word or two, because that's not paraphrasing. Using a synonym isn't paraphrasing, but really taking the information, put it in your own words. It shows you didn't just copy and paste it over, but you actually understand what you read. If you absolutely can't state it in any other way, then you can use direct quotes, but just make sure you do properly make that distinction. If I'm not paraphrasing, if I'm not putting in my own words, I have to use direct quotes. If you use a direct quote here and there, that's fine, but a heavy reliance on direct quotes will result in a lower grade. So when you look at the rubric, you'll see at about like the halfway point for each of the available points. So if it's out of 10 points, maybe like a 5, or if it's out of 2 points, a 1. But you'll see there's a reduction in points if everything is direct quoted. As for example, over the years, I've seen papers that are cited properly. It's not plagiarism, but it's almost like a patchwork quilt of direct quotes. And, technically, it's not plagiarism. You've covered your bases and the information's there, but it's not a paper that was written by a student. It's a bunch of copied and pasted information, right? So that's what we're trying to avoid here. We want you to actually learn to take it in yourself and relay it back to the reader. So if you have to use direct quotes, okay, just make sure you use them, but try to paraphrase. So, all that being said, discussion of your chosen theory is worth 10 points total. Of those 10 points, 2 are for describing and defining the theory you chose. So again, remember, the reader knows nothing. So what is the theory? What are the components of the theory? So if you chose the health belief model, what is it? What are the pieces of it, and what are those pieces? How does it work? And next, discuss the application of the theory. So now you've explained what the theory is, the parts it's made up of. Now talk about the application. So what is it used for? What's the point? How's it used? Who uses it? Anyone? Is it technically something that comes into play anywhere? Is it something used by health psychologists, nurses, etc.? What are some examples of scenarios in which this theory would be applied? So giving a picture of this theory in action. This is where maybe you'll get examples from your scholarly articles of your chosen theory in action in specific settings. So 4 points for that. And 4 points for discussing the advantages and the limitations of the theory. So remember that nothing is 100% good or 100% bad. So even the best theory is going to be missing some pieces. So if you remember the general adaptation syndrome, it doesn't take into account the interpretation of the events. So even groundbreaking fundamental theories have limitations. So what does the theory leave out? What's it helpful for? And explain those things. Don't just state them. And then the second part of part 2 is so you've just explained what this theory is, how it's used, advantages, limitations. Now apply that theory to your own behavior. So 10 points total, and 3 of those points is talking about how useful is this theory for understanding your own behavior change. So, technically it may not be useful at all, although I would suggest it's probably easier for you if you choose, out of the two theories, if you choose the one that you can apply better to your situation. I just imagine it would give you more to go off of. But technically, if it doesn't apply at all, then you can talk about that too. So, how useful is this theory for your own behavior change? So, by that, I mean, how well does it work to explain and understand the factors that impacted your ability to make the change, that facilitated it, or that held it back? You can reference some of the things that you talked about in your reflection above. Like you could say, as stated, X, Y, and Z were helpful factors for me. But to avoid unnecessary repetition, you can just avoid general discussion. Like, as stated above, all these things were hindrance and helpful factors. Like you've already said all that. And just discuss explicitly how those aspects relate to the theory and help you understand your own behavior. So, for example, my family all smokes, and they aren't concerned about the health risks. So the norms regarding smoking did not align with my judgment of smoking is dangerous, and this made it difficult to stop smoking. So in that case, that could have been a hindrance factor, but instead of just repeating that it was a hindrance factor, which you've probably already said in the first part, you're actually using that in the context of the health theory. So 3 points for applying it to your own behavior. 2 points to say, when you talk about this theory, does it give you any new insights of how you may be able to successfully make this change? Why or why not? So for example, if you struggled to make a change, does this theory help you identify reasons why? If you were successful, does it help explain things that helped to make you successful? So does looking at your health behavior change through the lens of this theory help you in any way? Like give you any insight? And for 2 points, according to this theory, what would help you? So similar to what insight have you gained, but getting a bit more specific here. So can this theory give you the answers that you need? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't apply well enough to your situation. If it doesn't give you any answers, why? Like what's missing? Why does it not apply? If it doesn't, what other theories could help? So you don't have to explain in detail if you mention any other theories. Make sure you define them. Just briefly a good operational definition, but you don't have to go into another massive reflection onto what the theory is. But if this theory doesn't help, are there any other possible theories that could be used instead? If you were successful, what aspects from this theory can help sustain change? Because remember, relapse prevention, it's super common to go back to old habits. So what aspects of this theory could help you keep going? And then, like I said, 3 points for having all 3 of the required sources. Excuse me. So 10 points total. So with the mandatory sources, the textbook and the 2 scholarly articles, those can come into play anywhere. They absolutely have to come into play when you talk about explain what the theory is. But if you want to bring them in again when you apply it to your own behavior, that's fine too. And then 5 points for APA formatting. So just like the first behavior journal. One question that came up a lot with the first journal was with the textbook. Obviously, usually when you make a citation, the citation is the people or the source that actually found that information. But, when it comes to a textbook, that doesn't necessarily apply. It's a book with a bunch of sources, like secondary sources. So usually, if you got the information from a source in a source, you would have to cite it as such. Like, Bob and colleagues 2000 as cited in these people. But for the sake of simplicity, because I'm requiring to use you to use the textbook, and the textbook is basically just a collection of secondary sources. If when you use information from your textbook, don't worry about citing all the little secondary sources that information came from. You can just cite the textbook. just for the simplicity with this specific paper. So everything is already on Blackboard for you, everything that you would need to do this. The submission folders active, the instructions are up there in Word and PDF format, along with the example of what a scholarly journal is. I will do another FAQ thing, probably one that's specific to this journal, although I'd imagine much of the ones from the first journal apply. Otherwise, if you have questions, please let us know, and this will take at least a week to do because you have to do that second post-change behavior monitoring, so don't leave this to the last minute. And like with the first one, if for whatever reason you run into issues with Blackboard, like it actually won't submit properly, then you can email it to me. Just make sure you explain why you're emailing it to me so I don't just get a random paper, and I'm not sure if it's because you just don't know to upload it to Blackboard or whatnot, or if you're actually having issues. So you can fire it off to me if you have problems, but the same deadline applies. So if you email it to me at like 5:30, it's still considered late. But if you have any questions, please reach out. And like I said, you don't have to resubmit your first journal because it's already in the system. But otherwise, good luck, and take care.